What's up guys? So you know how we like the weird and wonderful things here at Tech Lab? Well, today we're going to be taking a look at a cooler that is actually pretty weird. Now this is a cooler from Aerocool, and we've wanted one for a while now, but we didn't really want to pay the price that they cost. But we managed to get one cheap recently and we thought we'd take a look at it. So this is the Aerocool Mirage 5 air cooler from Aerocool. Usually these will cost you about £40, but we managed to pick one up in a Black Friday sale recently for just £16. Now we're not sure whether that is actually worth it. Aerocool generally do make some decent products, particularly their power supplies and their cases come at a budget price, but they're usually pretty well made. Now this cooler is one of the weirdest that we've seen in a long time. We actually couldn't, from the pictures and particularly from the website, see where the actual fan cooling system is on these, so we thought we'd pick one up and take a look to see how they actually work. As far as the product goes, it's actually packaged pretty well. Inside the box we have the instruction manual. It's on a bit of a piece of paper. That's not too bad, and it pretty much takes you through all of the things that this will fit, and particularly how to put it together. Also in the box we have a box of accessories, which is this one, and inside here they provide everything that you need to be able to install the cooler. We have a back plate which you can build for either the AM4, AM3, any of the Intel sockets pretty much, although they don't support the Intel 1700 just yet. You probably need a new type of bracket system for that. We have here the Intel brackets. We have the Intel 2011 brackets, so that'll fit the 2011 socket. We have the AM4 brackets. Now this is a little bit different to some of the AM4 coolers out there because they don't actually use the hook system, they use the screw through system onto the backplate. Now people usually like that one over the actual hook system because they're not great, but obviously this one comes fine. We also have a cable here which connects to the cooler for the RGB lighting. The cooler itself is packaged in two half-circled foam pieces which actually keep it nice and well and protected. And then we have the cooler itself. Now the cooler is in a plastic bag. If we just take it out of there, we'll see what kind of weirdness this is. And that's the actual cooler itself. It's a cylinder shaped cooler with no type of external fan on it. On the top we have an infinity mirror with RGB lighting and the Aerocool logo in between. And then we have all these fin stacks all the way down the sides. As far as heat pipes go, the cooler is made of aluminium throughout, apart from the copper heat pipes, which we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of, and they actually branch all the way up the sides. And then if we look just inside there, we can actually see there is a little fan inside there. Now, as far as dimensions go, this is actually 100mm wide and 145 tall. So you need to make sure you've got that kind of clearance in your case. The fan system inside is actually this wide, deep style fan. It's a 60mm fan. So I'm a little bit concerned on how much noise that will actually make, because obviously bigger the fans, slower we can push them, and the quieter they are. In terms of cabling, we have a 4-pin PWM, which is pretty cool to see. And then there's this extra little tiny cable that comes off of the side here, which is where the RGB connection connects to. Now, if you do install these without the RGB connection, you do get the standard rainbow ARGB all the way around, or you can obviously program it with the cable. Now, the max TDP for this cooler is 150 watts. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to cope with that because of the design, but I'm sure they've thought about it and I'm sure it will actually do fine. To install, obviously we'll just need this bracket on the back, and then all you need to do is build it up with the little pegs going through. Whether it's an Intel or not, you flip the bracket over and it's got the signs on either side. And then you obviously install these metal brackets depending on the actual socket you've got. So we actually installed one of these with AM4. They screw onto the bottom here, here, here and here. And then obviously you need to take your sticky off before you put your thermal paste on. It does come with thermal paste. I'm not sure how good Aerocool thermal paste is. We generally use something like Arctic MX4, but I'm sure it will be fine anyway. Once you've actually got these metal brackets installed to the cooler, you simply get the back plate, slip it through the motherboard, and then you line it up and put it on top, making sure that you do remember to pull off the sticky and also install your thermal paste. So that is a quick look over how the cooler works and what it's actually made of, including the specifications. But how well does it perform? Now, to find out, obviously we needed to do some testing. For the first time on this channel as well, we've actually done a bit of cooler testing. To test the thermals, we wanted as a real life scenario as we could, so we actually built a system into a case. Now, the case that we used was the NZXT H510. It's not the greatest for airflow, but it's also not the worst, so it kind of gives us a midfield. We also loaded up the system full of fans, including 2 intake 120s and 2 exhaust 120s set to a standard curve in the BIOS. Now this provided the system with plenty of airflow, so the cooler had no problems trying to keep up. When it came to thermal testing, we tested 5 different scenarios. The first we have is the temperature at idle. Now this cooler actually kept it around the 18 degrees, and that's mostly because the ambient temp of the room was kept at 12 degrees Celsius. In gaming, we actually tried Cyberpunk 2077, and we tried this for about 20 minutes just so the cooler could soak up the heat, and we got around a 32 degrees. When running Unigen Heaven for around the same time, 20 minutes, we got a 33.1 degrees. And then our last 2 tests were running Cinebench R23. In single core, obviously, the cooler could keep up quite well, getting a max temperature of 34.8. And when it came to multi-core, which really put the CPU under pressure, the cooler managed to maintain a max temperature of 43. Now obviously these scores aren't that much use to you unless you can see some kind of comparison, so we did exactly just that. Before we actually tested this cooler, we decided to create a baseline using a stock cooler, and for that we used the AMD Wraith Prism. Now the AMD Wraith Prism cooler is actually a pretty decent cooler, it's just a little bit loud, and it has a similar TDP to this one. In comparison, the AMD Wraith Prism slightly outperformed the Aerocool Mirage 5 when it was actually running in idle. We managed to see a 17.5 for the AMD Wraith Prism and an 18 degrees for the Mirage 5. Now that is obviously with intolerance, so they're probably pretty much exactly the same. In Cyberpunk 2077, there wasn't that much difference again between them, and neither was there in the Unigen Heaven tests or the Cinebench tests, although the biggest difference did come from the Cinebench R23 single core scores, where the Mirage managed to outperform the AMD Wraith by around 5 degrees. Now obviously looking at those temperature performance graphs, you can see that the Mirage 5 actually performs very similar to just a stock AMD Wraith Prism. If you do have an AMD Wraith Prism, they're actually pretty good looking as well, so there's probably no need to swap to this at all. But obviously we needed to do a little bit more testing because we wanted to know how well it actually performed when it came to noise. Now when it came to testing the noise, we decided to test 4 different scenarios. One where the fan system is at 25%, 50%, 75% and 100%. This should give us a broad range of scores to see particularly how noisy it is at different levels. The noise floor for these tests was around 30 decibels and the noise distance for our metering was around 20 inches. Now as you can see, the Aerocool Mirage 5 at 25% was pretty much around the noise floor, so it's very, very quiet when it's running at 25%. At 50% it increased only by a couple of decibels, which again you couldn't really tell that it was on. At 75% we saw a bit of a jump up to 38 decibels. Now that was actually making it audible, so you could tell there was a bit of a difference. Even though if you did put the side on the case, you couldn't really tell that much, it wasn't too bad. At 100% was where we actually saw some of the biggest gains. When you look at the 100% scoring, for the Aerocool Mirage 5 we saw a 45.1 decibels. Now 45.1 decibels is not quiet at all. It's actually a pretty noisy cooler when you get it up to that kind of speed. But again, we wanted to see how that compared to a stock cooler. And for that test, we also used the AMD Wraith Prism. It's not known to be the most quietest cooler at all, so hopefully the Aerocool cooler could keep up. When we came to do the comparison at 25%, the coolers were pretty much neck and neck. They were around the noise floor, so you couldn't really tell they were on. Once you hit 50%, again, very similar results there. Within margin, they're pretty much the same. At 75%, obviously the Aerocool Mirage 5 managed to pull away, getting a 38.6, whereas the AMD Wraith Prism had a 40.5. Now that doesn't sound much of a big gap, but in fact, those 2 decibels actually make the difference between being able to hear it with the side on the case and being able to hear it without. At 100%, the Aerocool Mirage 5 pulled away again, getting a 45.1, whereas the AMD Wraith Prism got a 46.7. Again, not that much difference when it comes to comparison, so these coolers are pretty much the same throughout. So that is the performance of this cooler. It's not the worst cooler in the world, it actually keeps up pretty much in line with the AMD Wraith Prism, which is actually a pretty decent cooler. It obviously looks different and it's a little bit funky for your case, but is it actually an upgrade? Pretty much not. If you do already have an AMD Wraith Prism cooler, this is not an upgrade for you. This cooler pretty much keeps in line with it, so it's probably not worth the money unless you're actually looking for aesthetics anyway. Although saying that, the AMD Wraith Prism does look amazing with its RGB lighting, and so does this one. But if you are looking for an upgrade for something like a stock Intel cooler, maybe it can actually make a decent one. I wouldn't actually pay the £40 that they're asking for this, because for £40 you can actually pretty much get like a Noctua or some kind of deep cool tower cooler, and they're going to perform way better than this one. But if it's something that you want in terms of uniqueness, purchasing this over a stock Intel cooler, for example, would actually make sense. Now let us know in the comments what you think about this cooler. Is it something that you would potentially buy? Do you think it actually looks cool, or do you think it actually looks a bit rubbish? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content, and we'll catch you in the next one.